These books really, really, this is no exaggeration. They have literally changed my life in such meaningful ways. As we go through various life stages and transitions, especially during midlife, it can be really helpful to spend time learning about ourselves, what makes us tick, and how we got to where we are now, wherever here is. It helps inform our decision making and how we want to create our future. But the sheer number of resources available can be overwhelming, and I'd love to share some of my favorites with you. So, as I have been going on my YouTube journey, I keep thinking back to the sources of inspiration that I've had along the way. And I just really feel like I can't continue on my journey until I share some of these. So there are 3 books that I keep coming back to over and over and over again because they have completely changed my life and how I think about my journey towards self growth and discovery. And I want to share those with you. And so, a little bit of a disclaimer, I have been historically a self improvement, self development junkie over the years. I've read a lot of books, I've gone to a lot of classes, I do a lot of journaling, I do all of the things. And so these 3 books have really, really stuck with me through the years and resonated with me and have come up over and over and over again in conversations with people about dealing with life's challenges and also in dreaming about the lives that we can create for ourselves. So I'm going to share those with you now in no particular order. The first one is called Finding Your Own North Star, Claiming the Life You Were Meant to Live by Martha Beck. This book I have recommended to people more than any other book in my life. I have actually purchased probably 5, 6, 7 of copies of this and given them to people because I felt like you have to read this and you have to read it now. So for context, I first came across this book. It was, I'm going to look at my notes here. It was published in 2001. I came across it in 2012 when I was going through a career change, what I thought was a career change journey. And I spent 2 years working outside of my normal career, doing some self-development, but also some coaching and some consulting. Really just took a 2-year pause. And this book was instrumental in helping me decide to make that change. And then also to help me decide what to do afterwards. Martha Beck is now a very well-known author. She has, her newest book is called, I think it's called The Way of Integrity. It's on my shelf back here. I've only started to read it, but it very much is in connection with this book as well. And the reason that I liked it so much was that there was so many practical applications and exercises that it has you do. And it really is about claiming the life you were meant to live, as the title suggests. There's some psychology in it, but there's also a lot of coaching. And she just does a really phenomenal job walking you through the step-by-step process of figuring out what your real inner calling is. And I don't mean in a grand, I'm going to change the world and do all these amazing things. That might come of it, but it's about finding what's inside of you and where you are really meant to be headed in your life and where you're not meant to be headed. It's just as important to know what to stop doing as it is to understand what you should be headed towards doing. So let me read some of the quotes here. I'm going to have to take off my glasses to do that. So first of all, she starts off with talking about that voice in your head that's everybody. Well, everybody says this about me and everybody thinks this about me and everybody. She really dives deep into helping you figure out where that voice is coming from and who those everybody's are and what they're saying and why. And it's just really, really powerful. And as you go along this journey, there are constructs that she introduces. And one of them is about this, the change cycle in your life. And it starts with death and rebirth. And that's the cycle where you are sort of coming to terms with who you are. You're learning about yourself. You are shaking off those everybody's. You're, going through all of the self-growth and development in your head. And then the second part to that is the dreaming and scheming. And that's where you really think about what really lights you up and the directions that you might want to be heading and that sort of thing. And then there is the hero saga, and that's where all the hard work happens. That's where you have to break things down step by step. Okay, I think I understand who I am and why. I know where I think I want to go. And now I have to get to the business of doing it. And she walks you through a bunch of steps on this hero saga. And then the fourth phase to that is the promised land. That's where things really start changing. You've put things in place, and now things are really changing. And this book, like I said, came to me at a time in my life where I stopped my career, paused it for a couple of years, and then went on to do something else. And so when I came upon this, I realized I was in sort of the hero's journey saga part of it. And then when I got my next job 2 years later, that was sort of the promised land. Here's the trick though. It doesn't just end there. It starts all over again. This is a process that you go through your whole life. And she just does an amazing job at walking you through it so that it's not so scary, and also to help you approach each of those phases in a way that is very purposeful and makes the most of it so that you're not losing lessons along the way. There's an exercise in here where she has you think about a huge accomplishment that you want to, or a huge thing that you want to do in your life. And imagine you've done it and you've been asked to do an interview for a newspaper or for a magazine. And she says, okay, so which magazine is it, right? Is it a travel magazine? Is it Time magazine? Is it National Geographic? What kind of magazine is it that you are being interviewed for, which is totally dependent on what that big dream was. And so I don't even remember what it was, but anyway, she asks you to detail out what this interview looked like. And one of the pieces is this person is coming to interview you. What's the setting? Where are they interviewing you? And so I started reading through that part. These are my notes. And I just got chills when I read this. So I'm going to read it to you. Again, this was 2012. So the setting of this interview for me, it was the New Yorker magazine. That's what it was, by the way. Being interviewed by Nicholas Kristof, because I had written some wonderful piece of literature. So the setting that it takes place in, it says, it's a small villa in Mexico where I live in the winter months with my husband. It's colorful, simple, and lush with plants. There's a pool just off the main living area with doors that slide open from floor to ceiling so that you can't tell the inside from the outside. And then it goes on with some of the other details. I kid you not. So that was 2012. I've said that a million times. I kid you not. In 2022, exactly 10 years later, I was living in a small town in Mexico in a house that had an open living area. So the kitchen and living room were only walled on three sides. There was a completely open side to it. So it didn't even have the doors that opened floor to ceiling. It was just open with all these beautiful lush green plants. And just on the other side of those lush green plants was this gorgeous pool. And my husband and I lived there for a year. Are you kidding me? I wrote this down 10 years before it actually happened. And this wasn't I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this exact thing happen. I wrote it down. I dreamed it. I thought about it. I knew it was sort of my calling. I really, I just pictured myself in this idyllic place. And 10 years later, I did it. And when I did it, I didn't think about this exercise and, oh, I remember I wrote this thing down and yay me. I didn't do that. I just discovered this as I was getting prepared to film this today. And I'm just blown away. And it just confirms for me why I do these things, right? Like, that's just crazy. So anyway, I'm going to put links to each of these books, by the way, in the description, so that you can easily put your hands on them. The second book is very different than Martha Beck's North Star. I almost called her Martha Stewart. It is called The Untethered Soul, The Journey Beyond Yourself by Michael Singer. This book it goes deep, and it is way more existential, not nearly as many, exercises. Think about this, do that. It is more philosophical and thought-provoking. It's a little bit on the spiritual side, but not too much. And when I read this book was shortly after I read the North Star book. And I remember I stopped reading it after like the first couple of chapters because I just really needed time for things to sink in. And it was so eye-opening and just required a lot of processing. And I want to read you a couple of quotes from this. The first chapter just was what really just kind of hit me over the head. It's called The Voice Inside Your Head. And he spends the entire chapter and then some, he keeps going on about that voice inside your head and where it comes from and what it is and what it isn't, and really helps you understand how to put a stop to it, especially the negative parts. And he does it much more eloquently than I can describe. But he says, there is nothing more important to true growth than realizing that you are not the voice of the mind. You are the one who hears it. And then he goes on to say, people go through so many changes in the name of trying to find myself. They want to discover which of these voices, which of these aspects of their personality is who they really are. The answer is simple: none of them. Eventually, you will see that the real cause of problems is not life itself. It's the commotion the mind makes about life that really causes the problem. Another quote that really resonated with me says, so there are two ways you can live. You can devote your life to staying in your comfort zone, or you can work on your freedom. In other words, you can devote your whole life to the process of making sure that everything fits within your limited model, or you can devote your life to freeing yourself from the limits of your model. And when I look back on this, I see that I remember that very, very specifically reading that. And that set me off on a whole journey of seeking discomfort. And when we moved to Mexico for a few years, it was really all about getting out of our comfort zones. And well, there were a lot of reasons, but from a self-development perspective, it was about getting out of my comfort zone. It was not just experiencing new experiences, but fundamentally changing how I lived so that I saw the world in a different way. Nailed it. Like, that was the most incredible experience. And I'm so glad I did it, because it has fundamentally changed how I walk through life now. So The Untethered Soul, The Journey Beyond Yourself by Michael Singer. This is not a sit down and read it front to cover, or cover to cover kind of a book. It's going to take you some time. You're going to need some time to digest it. So you pick it up, you put it down, you pick it up, you put it down. I think it took me a year to read this, because it's just so intense and deep. I couldn't wrap my brain around going through the whole thing all at once. Anyway, so that's the second book. The third one is a completely different book than that one. A much more modern book. It's was first published in 2020, which is when I read it. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. It was during the pandemic lockdown and I had lots of time. So I did read this one cover to cover. I think maybe in 2 sittings, but have gone back to it over and over and over and over again. And it's called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Many of you will have seen this, and this will be familiar to you. The reason I couldn't wait to pick it up was that Glennon was along on a journey with me back in the earlier 2000s when she started her blog called Momastery. She was a mommy blogger, and I had been a mommy blogger for a few years before that even, and was just very drawn to her work. She was funny. She was honest, just really an amazing writer, but also a very raw, real human being. And really with this book, this was more of a, it resonated with a lot of things that I was already thinking and feeling, but it sort of gave me permission to take that even further, and made me feel like I wasn't alone in this, made me feel seen. And there are just way too many quotes to pull from this that are inspirational, but I hate to just do the quick little sound bites, too many of them, because it really is about the context in which those sound bites are coming from. But I will read some of the quotes to you because so you get a sense of what the content is. And these are some of the things that just absolutely lit me up. So she says, because what scares me a hell of a lot more than pain is living my entire life and missing my becoming. What scares me more than feeling it all is missing it all. And when my husband watches this video, he's going to chuckle because that is that is so me. Like, I want to feel all of it, even though I feel things very intensely, and that can be really overwhelming, and I have to be careful with that. This is very true too. I'm afraid of missing it. I want to feel all of it. And she says it way better than I can. And then she goes on to say, and because who I will become tomorrow is so unforeseeable and specific that I'll need every bit of today's lessons to become her. So this is one that really hits home for me because I've been through some tough things in my life, and I've had people ask me along the way, God, don't you just sometimes wish that these things didn't happen? And, it sounds like, yeah, gosh, I wish I never got cancer. I wish I didn't have to be an abuse survivor as a child. I wish I didn't have, all of these things. I wish I had never gotten laid off or whatever it is. But when I think back on it, every single one of those things has made me who I am today. And I've had to learn the lessons from those things to make me who I am today. And so that I can become the person that I want to become and who I have become. And again, she says it much more eloquently than I do. But wow, like, to think about your life that way, that nothing that has happened to you has happened for no reason. And they have all made you who you are. And that doesn't mean that we should all seek suffering because that's not the case at all. But I'll need every bit of today's lesson to become her. Whew, okay. And the last quote I want to share with you is sort of how I think about this book in general. She says, the fire that burned me up for the first half of my life is the exact same fire I'm using now to light up the world. And again, that's a nod to all of the things that I've gone through in my life have gotten me to where I am now, and I'm using them as fodder for pushing forward and becoming whatever it is that you're becoming. I cannot begin to do any of these books justice. They are incredible. They spoke to me. They may or may not speak to you, and that's totally okay. But I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts that I had about these and why they're so important to me. And I encourage you to seek your inspirations, and whether it's in book, whether it's a book that you can put your hands on, or it's an audio book, or it's a podcast, or a speaker that you go to see, or whatever it is, but invite that into your life and use it to explore yourself and see what happens. If you have some books or other sources of inspiration that you want to share with me and with everybody else in our community, please put them in the comments below. I'd love to find new things to read and get new ideas. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you making it this far. And thank you for giving me a reason to go back and revisit some of these things that have just lit me up from the inside over the years. And I'm going to go back and read some of these again because there are a lot more lessons to learn. I'm a different person than I was the first time or the second time or the third time that I read them. So I'm still on my journey. Come along with me.